On the 6th of March, 1998, war broke out in Kosovo. I know this because my family is from Yugoslavia. A 12-year-old boy named Rexhep, born into an ethnic Albanian family, was forced to flee his home. He'd been raised mostly by his grandmother. He had to leave her behind. He boarded a flight to Geneva alone, except for the father that he'd barely known, who had been working in Switzerland for years, sending money back to feed the family. He arrived in a country he didn't know, a language he didn't speak, a continent away from everyone he loved. He was 12 years old. The first thing the 12-year-old refugee noticed at the airport, he would tell interviewers many years later, were the posters of the watches. That same boy today makes some of the most quietly extraordinary watches on earth. A single piece he made sold at auction for 800,000 Swiss francs. Collectors wait years to be allowed the opportunity to buy one. The man that's universally regarded as the greatest living watchmaker has named him as his favorite of the next generation. You almost certainly have never seen one of his watches in person. His name is Rexhep Rexhepi, spelled Rexhep, Rexhepi. You may hear it pronounced Rexhep, but my understanding is that it's Rexhep. And today, his is the only story that we're going to tell. So welcome back to What's on Your Riste. I'm Wachowski. This is the third episode in a connected trilogy. Episode 11 was about Rolex, a brand whose value lives in maximal recognition. Episode 12 was about Renaud and Papi, and specifically brands that, live in this bloodline that some of us in the hobby can trace back to. Today's episode is this third vertex of that triangle. Today is about a brand who lives in something quieter. This entire value lives in something quiet. Quieter than most listeners could even imagine before getting into this hobby. A brand whose value is in the recognition of just this tiny global community of people who can see what nobody else can see. And today is about a watch that you wear when the entire point is that nobody needs to know. Settle in, this one's going to matter. All right, so segment one, we're going to call this The Boy from Kosovo. Rexhep was born in 1987 in Kosovo to an ethnic Albanian family. So for the first decade of his life, he lived modestly, raised primarily by his grandmother, while his father worked in Switzerland and sent money back home. And there wasn't much money to send back. There wasn't much of really anything. He told interviews that as a child, if he wanted a toy, he had to make it himself. And already, even then, he was getting to become good with his hands. And this one thing he remembers most clearly from those years was his father's wristwatch, a simple Tissot. Whenever his father visited home, the watch came with him. Rexhep, a small boy, tried repeatedly to open it, and he never succeeded. And in March 1998, war came. Serbian forces moved on Kosovo, and 12-year-old Rexhep was put on a plane to Geneva to join his father, and the family was permanently separated. And he never returned to live in Kosovo again. In Geneva, as a refugee, he started over. New language, new school, a father he barely knew. And this is the part that, in retrospect, that quality of fate occurs. There were those airport posters. The watch industry is massive in Geneva airports. Specifically, their advertising campaigns are massive. For the new arrival, the first thing that he saw were these posters in this new country. And he said this in interviews that the posters of the watches made an immediate and very deep impression on him. He didn't yet know he was going to become a watchmaker, but that seed had been planted well before he understood it. So by age 14, guess what? He decided it. Watchmaking. He started applying for apprenticeships. And here's the first of almost purely impossible things that are going to happen in this story. In a class of roughly 300 applicants, 300 kids from across Switzerland and beyond, and many of them Swiss, and many of them from established watchmaking families, many of them with private tutors and connections and strings that were pulled. Rexhep Rexhepi was one of the apprentices that Patek Philippe selected out of all of those people. A Kosovan refugee who had been in Switzerland for just 2 years. Patek Philippe, age 14, just barely going on 15. He signed a formal contract at 15, and the apprentice that that apprenticeship that he earned was a 5-year program, 3 years split between Patek's manufacturer and then going into Geneva's School of Watchmaking. Then 2 years in Patek's actual workshop, assembling watches, casing them, working alongside watchmakers with decades of experience. He said that the apprenticeship was extraordinary. He learned finishing, as he says, the right way. He learned discipline. He learned patience. I have this is where my world comes in too. We have this long saying in our family that we do not pray for patience, because when you pray for patience, you get opportunities to practice your patience. And I would assume that a young boy in a world of finishing men and women, of Patek Philippe, had to practice some patience. He learned what was, quote, good enough, and what that meant inside the four walls of Patek. And what that means is good enough is not good enough. It has to be better, which, as you can imagine, is an extremely high and fairly demanding standard. There is one detail from his Patek years I want you to hold on to because I think it matters. As an apprentice at Patek, Rexhep was one of the few apprentices permitted to sign his own name on his school watch dial. And now the school watch is the first watch that every apprentice makes. It's kind of like their diploma piece. It's the graduation watch. And most apprentices sign it with the school's name. And by doing so, they're actually required to sign it with the school's name. Now, Rexhep was given permission to sign it with his name. In a small but significant ceremony, his name went on a dial inside Patek Philippe walls. Now hold on to that moment for a second. That piece of permission is going to come back when we get to 2018, so hold on to that. After Patek, Rexhep wanted to learn more, so he moved to a company called B&B Concept, which was at the time one of the most important independent movement makers in Geneva. So B&B designed and produced complicated movements for very high-end brands as this sort of B2B supplier. So sort of this business-to-business supplier. They were tourbillons and chronographs and repeaters, like the works. And he spent 3 years, and within a year of arriving, despite being only 20 years old, Rexhep was running a team of 15 watchmakers working on tourbillons. 20 years old, 15 people reporting to him already at Geneva's most important complications house. After 3 years, he moved on to FP Journe. This is the part I think that your ears will kind of perk up a little bit if you're one of the listeners that knows this space. And if you have any depth in this hobby, you're going to recognize FP Journe as one of the most respected independent watchmakers alive. Their movements, their work, their dedication to the craft is extraordinary. And Journe's watches are among the most coveted pieces in modern independent horology. Rexhep worked under François Journe directly. He worked on the octa. He worked on the chronometers. He worked on the resonance. He absorbed Journe's operational philosophy. And Journe operates on a principle that almost no other watch brand in the world follows. One watchmaker is responsible for one watch, start to finish. The watchmaker assembles it, the watchmaker tests it, they see it through to the customer. And crucially, if that watch ever comes back for service, the same watchmaker is responsible for fixing it. The watchmaker is responsible. There's no autonomous system. There's no AI. There's no anonymous service center. There is no factory. There is a person, a name, a bench, and that watch. And Rexhep said that in interviews that this is how he thought about everything: accountability, intimacy, the relationship between the maker and the wearer. Those 2 years at Journe were formative for Rexhep. And then, and this is again one of those unbelievable moments when you think about it, at the age of 25 now, Rexhep Rexhepi, he went out on his own. No investors, no partners, no private backing, no equity lines, right? Just his savings, his skill, and an idea. And he founded Akrivia. You'll hear it pronounced 2 ways, in Geneva's Old Town. So let's talk about Akrivia. Segment 2, we're going to talk about strictness and the workshop it built. The name Akrivia comes from the Eastern Orthodox Church, and it refers to a principle: strict observance of canonical law. No deviations, no shortcuts, no compromises. Akrivia is the watchmaking equivalent of orthodoxy. The rule says do it the right way every time, even when nobody is watching. For a 25-year-old who just left FP Journe to start his own workshop, That name is a manifesto. It's a public declaration that the workshop will be governed not by what's commercially convenient, but by what is correct. The earlier years, though, boy, were they hard. This is the part of the story that I think most accounts will skip over. And again, when you're doing your homework and I try to give you stories, this is the part that I want to bring up as well. Because it's going to go into and it's going to show you some of Rexhep's character and his determination and his grit. I want to spend a minute on it because I think it matters. And it matters more to this story. And it's part of the story that I think gets forgotten. The Shep's first major Akrivia piece was a tourbillon, and he finished it. And it was in his words, he was sure that everyone was going to love this thing, genuinely. He'd come up with, he came up at Patek and B&B and Journe, and he knew what good work looked like. And he made what he believed was a great watch. And he was sure this market was going to respond. They were going to eat this thing up. And guess what? No one bought a watch for 2.5 years. 2.5 years. I'm going to read it again. No one bought a watch for 2.5 years. A young watchmaker in Geneva, recently out on his own, no investors, no safety net, no marketing budget, having staked everything on his belief that this would work and the work would speak for itself. And guess what? Nobody bought a watch. And he's talked about that period and what it taught him. He says, when you have nothing but time, he said, all you can do is think about how to do it better. So that's what he did. He sat down with the work, he refined his approach, he kept producing pieces. And the first buyer, when one finally did appear, was, and this is, I think, one of the small great details in modern watchmaking, kind of a tip of the hat to this entire space, was another man from Kosovo. Somehow, an Albanian collector found the Kosovo refugees' workshop somewhere in Geneva's Old Town and somehow opened that door. And after that, things started to move. But it wasn't until 2017 that things really shifted. And it was a particularly small watch, a more compact piece that for the first time showed off Rexhep's classical finishing rather than his avant-garde sensibility. And that caught the attention of someone who would change his trajectory, a man named Michael Tay, the CEO of the Hourglass, and it's a very prestigious Singapore-based watch retailer. And the Hourglass has this history of identifying watchmakers super early. Think of them as kind of like the watchmakers talent scout. And they were the first retailer who actually seriously represented Philippe Dufour, if that tells you anything. When Michael Tay saw Rexhep's work, he saw what he had seen in Dufour's work decades before, and he made him a proposal. A very bold one is probably not going to capture how bold this actually was. Tay said to Rexhep, make a round classical dress watch and put your own name on the dial, not Akrivia, your name. And Rexhep, in his telling, hesitated. He'd been very candid about this. He was intensely shy about putting his Albanian name on a Swiss dial. He said in his interviews, I'm Albanian, I'm from Kosovo. I was really shy about putting my name on the dial of a watch. His father had also raised him to be discreet and respectful about putting his name on a watch, and he felt like he was being disrespectful and doing the opposite of what he had been trained. And again, from my perspective, as someone whose name is Riste Simjanovski, who gets called Riste and Richie and Trisket and all of these other things in the world, right? I get it. I get it. The names themselves, they are intimidating at time and at times you try to, again, that's probably why I would assume when someone's name is Rexhep, they might accept Rexhep, Rexhepi, right? They might accept a bunch of variants of that because again, in humbleness, you're not correcting a lot of people. And so I get that. I mean, hey, you're on a show called What's on Your Riste, and my name's actually Riste, right? And so again, when we talk about Michael Tay pushing back, again, when we look at history, he said, look at the history of watchmakers. History is about watchmakers putting their name on the watches they made. Rexhep, you should just try it. And Rexhep remembered, or maybe I guess he didn't quite forget, that moment when he was 15 years old in Patek's workshop and he had been permitted to sign his name on the school watch. So guess what? He tried it, and the result was extraordinary. Segment 3, let's talk about that watch that changed everything. You're going to know this watch as the RRCC, Chronomètre Contemporain, right? This is the released watch of 2018, and to put it mildly, it's not what anyone expected. Akrivia had spent 6 years building this reputation as a very progressive brand. There were bold case tourbillons. There was this prominent display on the dial, the architecture, the movement, the avant-garde watchmaking. It was kind of the watch shop's identity, and that RRCC was the exact opposite of that. It was literally a 38 millimeter classical dress watch. It had a round case, it had long, elongated, polished or elongated lugs, polished bezel, a grand fou enamel dial. Grand fou meaning like they literally fired these dials at super high temperature in a very traditional old way, getting these enamel dials that that had been made kind of the same way for the last like 200 years. And the dial featured Roman numerals. It had a small seconds register at 6 o'clock and hand finished steel hands. And for me, how much I love a small seconds at 6. I think the marine style watches for me are there's a soft spot in my heart for those watches. And so from the front of it, it could have been a watch from like 1925, 1955, 1985. There was nothing progressive about that watch. What was progressive was how it was made. And this is pretty wild too. Case was made from Jean-Pierre Hagman. Now, if you don't know that name, let me explain a little bit to you about Hagman. And it's Hagman with two N's at the end. I have to pause again for a minute here because Hagman himself, the dude's a legend. He's in his 80s at the time of this recording. He's been making watch cases for 60 years. And the most prestigious Patek Philippe minute repeaters of the last 20th century, the cases were all made by Hagman. And by the 2010s, he had been kind of semi-forgotten by the industry. And Rexhep tracked him down somehow, and then 2019 brought him into the Akrivia workshop. And now Hagman works on Akrivia cases in the workshop that's directly across the street from Rexhep's atelier. 88 plus years old at the time of this recording, filing and turning cases by hand in service of like a 30-something-year-old Kosovo refugee, right? Watchmaking has stories like this, and I wish I didn't have to dig so hard to find stories like this. Now, the movement of the RRCC, by every serious account, is extraordinary. It's hand wound. It has a 3/4 plate architecture. Has these beautiful beveled bridges throughout. Black polished steel surfaces, crisp interior angles, and again, the kind of angles that in hot horology can only be made by hand. You know this. Machines cannot cut a true inward angle on a bridge, and they definitely can't polish them. And by the most cited finishing element was something that Philippe Dufour said that he has identified as the secret to this glow of a great movement. He calls it the Bombay surfaces. It's French for rounded or domed, but Bombay is the surface is this polishing bridge or plate that has this subtle convex or a curve to it. It's not flat, it's not faceted, but it's kind of like gently swollen. And if you do this correctly, a Bombay surface catches light from literally every angle, and it produces this quality, kind of a glow that no flat surface can replicate. Now, Philippe Dufour has gone on record saying that the Bombay technique is literally the single most important reason that his simplicity movement looks alive when you put it under a loop. It's one of those things where, and again, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here. It's one of those things where people look at them, and it's kind of like when they sit in an art a museum and they're staring at art, and you just see people kind of get emotional. When people put on loops and they're looking at these pieces and they see what they see, they do. There's something real that they feel inside that is very, very different than what you would see from something that was made by a machine. And again, the RRCC's movement is full of Bombay. And the watch debuted in 2018 at the Grand Prix in Geneva. And guess what? I say Geneva, I apologize. And it won the most important award that this watchmaker could make. It won the men's watch category. For Rexhep, this was the moment that changed literally everything. Like no Akrivia piece had even made it into like the final 6 at any GPHG category at that point. So the RRCC to show up and just win outright globally, and then suddenly collectors knew exactly who this was. The day after that, collectors knew this person. And in 2022, for Akrivia's 10th anniversary, Rexhep released the RRCC2, the second generation. And from the outside, it looked almost identical. Same 38 millimeter case, same enamel dial, same lug profile, almost. But from the inside, almost nothing is the same. It's a completely new movement, designed specifically and designated as the RRCC02. It's a completely new caliber. It had twin going trains, 2 complete independent gear trains that were running in parallel. One that was running for the hours and minutes, and another one that was completely driving an independent deadbeat seconds hand. The deadbeat seconds hand, again, is for people that don't know, it moves and advances exactly 1 full second at a time with this precise mechanical jump. Rather than sweeping smoothly, it literally ticks. And again, when you have a quartz watch, they tick. The idea of making a mechanical watch that ticks is insane. Putting them on completely different gear trains is twice as insane, if that's even a thing. And so it's the same principle that kind of makes this marine chronometer secondhand. They make them visually distinctive. And the RRCC's 2, the deadbeat second, has this hacking and a zero reset function that's built into it. And the case itself, redesigned by Hagman, has slightly elongated lugs, a slimmer bezel. The proportions are just subtly improved. And when we think about like iterations, for example, I would say that the case was iterated and the dial slightly iterated, and then the movement, full-blown architecture changes. There's 2 variants. There's this platinum with black enamel. There's a rose gold with white enamel. There's 50 pieces of each. At pricing, they're on request only. But at this point, the data should give you kind of a sense of where this brand has landed. So a unique piece version of the RRCC2, it was made for the Only Watch charity in 2021. So again, made it just for donation to charity. It sold for 800,000 Swiss francs, roughly $1 million at the time of this recording, for one hand-wound, time-only, classical dress watch with the Rexhep's name on the dial. And who said dress watches were dead, right? Segment 4, 2 collections, Akrivia and Rexhep Rexhepi. So quick housekeeping, because this kind of can trip up people a little bit. And I think as you're doing, again, as I'm doing homework and I try to, other than butchering every single language on the planet, and I apologize to everyone for that, I try really hard to get facts and figures correct. And I also try to clarify things that might be confusing. So let me try to clarify one thing. The workshop actually produces 2 distinct collections under the same roof. So the first is the Akrivia collection, Akrivia. It's the workshop's original creative voice. So this avant-garde, progressive, complications forward range, they have the AK01, it's a tourbillon regulator. The AK02, it's a tourbillon with an hour and a minute. It's the AK06, the tourbillon monopusher chronograph. And these watches are bold and the cases are unusual, and the complications are displayed prominently on the dial side. Tourbillon cages are exposed. Architectural symmetry has nothing classical about it. Now, this is Rexhep and how he started his workshop 25 years ago, and before he had the confidence to put his own name on his work. And the second is Rexhep Rexhepi's collection. This is where the launch kind of occurred in 2018 with the RRCC. These are classical, restrained, round cases, 38 millimeters, Roman numerals, enamel dials, right? These are the kinds of watches that your great grandfather might have worn, except mechanically and aesthetically, it's one of the finest watches that's made or being made by anyone alive right now on this planet. And these 2 collections, they coexist. They coexist. They represent the same watchmaker at 2 different ends of his creative range. And I think this is rare. Most independents are either avant-garde or classical. Rexhep insists on being both. He said in interviews that he doesn't want to be pinned down. He wants to make the watches he wants to make, and the workshop is built around that freedom. The Akrivia collection is what he wants to make, when he was 25. And the Rexhep Rexhepi collection is what he was finally ready to make when he was, 35. Akrivia when he was 25, Rexhep when he was 35. And the fact that he keeps both lines instead of abandoning Akrivia and abandoning that identity when his own name took over, that to me tells you that this is a person that you want to kind of get to know. It's a move that tells you who he is. He didn't outgrow the early work, he kept it and he added to it. And the workshop's range expanded rather than narrowed. Now let's talk about Philippe Dufour in segment 5. And again, you know that I like questions. I like asking good questions. And I think when you get good questions, you get good answers if you're willing to be patient and listen. The Philippe Dufour question. If you've been listening for 13 episodes, you know who Philippe Dufour is. The greatest watchmaker, living watchmaker by consensus. The simplicity, again, the name of the watch is the simplicity. The next watch is the duality. Again, another name of a watch, the simplicity and the duality. They're tiny annual productions, but there's this universal reverence. And when you say Philippe Dufour in this hobby, conversations in watch circles, they stop. So when François-Paul Journe, again, Rexhep's old boss, one of the other most respected living independent watchmakers, was asked in an interview who his favorite young watchmaker was. He had a single answer, a single word. He said, Rexhep. And then he added with a smile, and I'm quoting his actual interview here, especially now that he's stopped copying me. And that is the polite but unmistakable way that watchmakers talk to each other. Guess what? That is not an insult. It's a coronation. It's the fact that someone has so much respect for you that they get to the point where they can start to joke around. And people know this, right? If you have family members, the ones in your friends, the ones that you joke around with the most are the ones that typically you care for the most, that can take jokes, that you can have fun with. And the fact that someone like F.P. Journe and Philippe Dufour are not only complimenting you, but now making jokes, it tells you that this coronation has occurred with these two. The two most respected independent watchmakers, Dufour and Journe, have effectively named Rexhep as the next generation standard bearer, the successor to a lineage that runs through people like George Daniels and Kari Voutilainen and Dufour himself. Watchmakers who make watches the way that watches were made when watchmaking was still mostly a craft and not yet mostly industrialized. And Rexhep has, for this part, been completely unwilling to play this role theatrically. He said in interviews, I just want to make watches. I don't want to be the next Journe. I don't want to make 900 watches per year. If people like Akrivia today because of its philosophy, you will lose that the moment we start to produce more watches. He's basically saying, look, if people like what we're doing now, if we do more of what we're doing, people who originally liked it will not. And so the workshop stays at roughly 35 watches per year total across both collections. 15 people in Geneva's Old Town making 35 watches per year. And now look, he could be making 300, he could be making 3,000. The wait lists are years long, and the market would absorb any reasonable expansion and specifically any price that he set. But guess what? He doesn't expand. This refusal, this permanent commitment to being small, is literally the philosophical heart of his operation. And it's the single best reason that Rexhep Rexhepi is who he is in this hobby. Because what makes a watch valuable in the way that Rexhep's watches are valuable is not the marketing or the recognition. It's the certainty built into the structure of the brand itself that the watchmaker will never, ever compromise the work to just make more of it. Other brands talk about it. Rexhep is structurally incapable of doing anything else. And the workshop is small because he refuses to make it bigger. Let's get into segment 6. What Rexhep's watches are asking and answering. Again, I told you I love questions. So here's what I want to land before we close, because this episode is again the third in this connected trilogy. At least in my head, I see these post-it notes making sense to me. And the trilogy has been building towards a question that I've had for a couple of episodes now. Episode 10 was asking you, why are you actually buying the watches you buy? And it introduced this frame of hedonia and eudaimonia, pleasure and meaning, the fun watch and the watch that makes you, you. Episode 11 asked, when your friend wants to buy a Rolex, what kind of friend should you be? It looked at what it meant when you have these watches, what it means that where this value of the watches actually lived. And it's specifically when you talk about Rolex, and it's this maximum public recognition. Everybody knows. And then episode 12 kind of snuck in Renaud and Papi in this bloodline and these brands whose values live in this lineage, this portion of the hobby that can recognize respect, even if the watch on the wrist isn't broadly famous. And so then with those kind of components, and specifically this idea of eudaimonia and hedonia and that kind of pulling together these triangles of Rolex and Renaud and Papi, this is the final vertex of this triangle. And inside of that triangle lives this hedonia and eudaimonia argument. So today's vertex is the question of this idea of the watch whose value lives in something that is quieter still than anything that we've talked about. The Rexhep Rexhepi's watches, the RRCC 1 and the RRCC 2, And the various Akrivia pieces are, in public, they're invisible. Like, no logo anyone outside of this deep hobby would recognize. No distinguishing visual features that any uninitiated would notice. The platinum RRCC2 that sold for 800,000 Swiss francs in a hotel ballroom in Geneva, that watch on a wrist in a coffee shop would not register to 99.999, and you can go down the rabbit hole of how many nines you want to put on that percent of the people who passed it. Look, it looks beautiful, made in extraordinary fashion. But from the outside, from someone that doesn't know, it's going to look like an ordinary dress watch. And this, for me, is going to be the hardest part, I think, to say out loud. That's the entire point. Rexhep is the watchmaker who answers the question the whole hobby keeps circling, but doesn't always come out to say out loud. And the question is, what is the value of a watch nobody recognizes? And the answer he gives through every single dial, every single bridge, every single Bombay surface, every single black polished steel component is yes, the value can live entirely in your understanding what's on your wrist. And if it does, if you can wear a watch like that and feel about it the way that you feel about it because of what you know, you are completely free. Free of the recognition economy that defines so much of modern luxury, that concept of flex culture, the idea of free and becoming free from this comparison game, free from social ranking that other people will try to apply to your own wrist. Guess what? The watch is yours. The watch is only yours. The conversation about it with the world is one with you alone. If you choose to talk about it, you talk about it. But if you choose not to, no one will ever ask because no one will ever notice. And this is fascinating because now that you understand a little bit about Rexhep and his character and the way that he carries himself, it tells you a lot about what's actually being produced by him. This is the deepest possible expression of a eudaimonic watch. A watch whose meaning is entirely internal. A watch you wear not because anyone else will notice, but because you know. That doesn't mean that the watch isn't beautiful. They are stunning. Dial side or watchmaker side, they are stunning. Now, every brand we've covered on this show, every Yema, Chopek, Pequene, Studio Underdog, Lane, Torres de Lina, right? All of them, every single one of them operates somewhere on this spectrum between Rolex on one end and Rexhep Rexhepi on the other. Recognition on one side, pure, eternal, and internal meaning on the other. And most of us in this hobby eventually find ourselves moving along that spectrum. Typically, and I'm going to say this out loud now, if you've been in this collection stuff long enough and you have a heart and a character and you enjoy this and you understand the people behind the space and it's not flipping watches, you start to move towards the quiet end. And I think if you've been with me for long enough, I think that's why we're on this journey together. And I think that's why this tribe is kind of growing. You start to move toward the watches that don't need anyone else to validate. You don't need a validation from anyone. And again, not because the recognition side is bad, it is not. And we've been very clear about that. But because once you've felt what it's like to wear a watch that only you know about, you start to want more of that feeling. It's freedom, it's intimacy. It's a private conversation with an object that no one else can have on your behalf. And it is the exact opposite of every single Reddit conversation you're going to have. This is what Rexhep Rexhepi represents. It's what Akrivia represents. And that is the argument for independent watchmaking. It's distilled from my perspective. This is the best I can do into its most concentrated form. Now, segment 7, let's get real. Pricing reality. Let's be honest about access. Current Rexhep Rexhepi pieces on the public market are priced roughly between 50,000 and 350,000 pounds. That converts real ugly when you start to get to US dollars. Auction results have approached 750,000 for a very specific and very special examples. The only watch, the RRCC 2, that hit 800,000 Swiss francs, $1,000,000. And the wait lists are years long. And allocation is curated personally, speaks with most buyers before delivery. And you do not casually buy a Rexhep Rexhepi for 99, again, 0.99999 5% of listeners, including myself, by the way, this is not a watch that you or I will own. And I want to be clear about that. And I'm not making a recommendation. I'm not pretending that this is accessible. But here's what's more important than the idea of ever owning one. It's the existence of watchmakers like Rexhep who quietly work at this level in this very small workshop with this much discipline. It's what makes the rest of this hobby legible. Every brand we cover on this show is somewhere on the spectrum between mainstream luxury and Rexhep. Knowing where the ceiling of independent watchmaking sits, knowing what the apex look like, knowing how you understand the value of everything below that. If you can ever, by the way, ever, at a watch fair, at a dealer's tray in person, or even briefly see a Rexhep Rexhepi watch in the metal, do it. Stop what you're doing, get in line, whatever you have to do. Photos will not capture it. Now, I say that, and I am heartbroken that I haven't, but speaking to people that have managed to handle or at least being able to interview some of those folks, the descriptions, they don't capture it. Journalists who've handled these watches describe the quality of light, this Bombay glow under a loop, the precision of finishing that is in person. It's genuinely emotional. And again, I'm not someone that will go into an art museum. When I was younger, I would go into an art museum and I would just go through the motions and go look at the images, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm one of those people that will sit down and when something is moving, I will sit there and stare at that thing because I feel like it's actually pulled me in. Now, what that means is that piece of art is speaking to me because there is something that the artist was trying to come across or give across or show and it's showing their story. And you see something like a beautiful piece of art, whether it's painting, sculpture, you're reading literature, poetry, whatever it is, and it speaks to you, it's because you have a similar story or something is speaking to you about that. And now you know Rexhep's background. You know what he's gone through. You know what he's sacrificed. And you start to understand when you see something like this, how incredibly magnificent it is and how it's speaking directly to you. Again, it can be genuinely emotional. For other people, they do not get it, and that's completely okay. Some people will actually possibly listen to this or, take a clip of it or whatever and say this person's insane. But again, we're not speaking the same language. Maybe they have an emotional response to a vehicle or a car or whatever it is, right? These ideas of things that pull on emotions for us are significant, but they're also rare in our quick time on this planet. And again, we may never own one. Again, most of us won't. But standing in front of one, even for 10 minutes, just looking, that might be one of the greatest experiences that you might ever have in this hobby. So I encourage you that if you get the opportunity to take it. Now, segment 8, let's talk about what's next because that was, for me, one of the hardest episodes I think I've had to organize and write and deliver. This is kind of the climax of this 4-episode arc. It had episode 10, 11, 12, and then today. And if you stuck with me through that whole thing, you saw hopefully what my logic was, which was the hedonia and eudaimonia episode, which I'm sure some people, when they saw that title, probably didn't click on the audio. When they clicked on it, they probably saw Rolex and clicked on that immediately. And then Renaud and Papi, maybe. And then Rexhep, I hope you got listen to this one. And again, this was heavier. This stretch is heavier than whatever I've ever asked an audience to kind of sit through a podcast. And again, I'm trying something very, very different than I think what we're used to. I'm not here to sell you on specific watches. My goal isn't to go and talk about the newest release from major luxury conglomerate. That's not how I roll. My job here and my role is to tell stories of things that I think are fascinating. But it also means that I understand that one, I'm very grateful for you for listening, and two, I know when to breathe or I try to, and I understand when I get too intense at times. And so as a result, I also know when it's time to exhale. And so I think this is a moment where I think we're going to exhale into the next part. Next episode, we're going to do something very practical, something fun, something useful in a way that I think doesn't require you to have spent the last hour thinking about Geneva watchmaking. The episode itself is going to be kind of this applied aspect. And I'm not going to tease too much about it, but just understand that my goal here is to have you be a part of this community. And again, as you're working through this, I'm hoping that some of this stuff is making sense to you if you're along for the journey. All right. So next, I want to get into the idea of Rexhep Rexhepi, and I want to again, if you've enjoyed any of this stuff, I'm just I'm honored. There are multiple countries that are listening to this now, which is crazy. So again, just know that I'm genuinely appreciative. Okay, so closing this out. If you have ever get the opportunity to see Rexhep in person, I want you to send me a message, please. I beg you. Send me a message. I'd love to see your face looking at that watch. That'd just be awesome. And then I want to say this personally to Rexhep and then the team at Akrivia. Thank you for doing the work that you do, for the discipline, for the refusal, the absolute refusal to make more of them. I know that it sounds counterintuitive, me thanking you for making less of something, but that refusal to make more of them is the right decision. And this hobby is bigger and it's better, and it's also quieter because of people like you. And then finally, my kiddos enjoyed making this music with me, so it pronounces your name a little, what I would say is incorrectly, but they did it as kind of a tip of the hat to the way that I think some of the cultural things that we run into. So I hope you appreciate that. So I'm Wachowski. Take care of yourselves and wear something good. And again, folks, whatever that means to you and to everyone that's listening. And if this ever makes it to the ship, just know that we appreciate you, brother. All right. And yeah, take care of those kiddos, man. I know you're having fun with being at Pops as well. So congratulations on that. All right. God bless, guys.
In the broken road, with a pocket full of dust and hope. At 14, under a master's eye, he learned to make the hours alive. Rexhep Rexhepi, soft as rain, kind in the hand, clear in the brain. He speaks low, but his work will sing, steel to moonlight, spring by spring. From worn-out land to a steady flame, he kept his name, he kept his aim. Now every tiny gear Akrivia, 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 Akrivia. Beautiful worlds on a tiny face. Rexhep's hands, they set the pace. Akrivia, 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 Akrivia. Family man with a humble smile, making the finest time. His own shop now, his own front door. Still he works like he did before. No loud pride, just careful grace. A steady heart and a crowded place. From rough old nights to a polished gleam, he built his life like a timeless dream. And every watch that leaves his door says there is beauty worth much more. Akrivia, 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 Akrivia. Beautiful worlds on a tiny face. Rexhep's hands, they set the pace. Akrivia, 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 Akrivia. Family man with a humble smile, making the finest time. When the world was hard and cold, he kept his craft, he kept his soul. One small tick, one bright new ring, a quiet man can build a king. Akrivia, Akrivia. From the old road